All right. You guys ready to do this? Yeah. All right, cool. Thank you guys all for coming. Thanks for registering and donating. It keeps this awesome event going. I want to thank my sponsor, Bay Area Reefers, local reef club. I've been a member for 18 years. It's great. Look into it. The reason I chose this talk and had talk with Chad about doing this talk is because I think it's very important to feed your corals. I feed my corals a lot. Some of you may know I run elevated nutrients. Some of my tanks are really high, and that's because I feed my corals heavy. I feed my corals probably 3 times a week, a wide variety of foods. I believe a happy, healthy coral is a strong, resilient coral, so they could just withstand all the swings we throw at our tanks. So I thought Chad, having his knowledge and expertise in this field, is a perfect person to have this talk. Chad, you guys may know him as the face of reef nutrition and see him at coral farmers markets, all the big reef trade shows, and basically every reef related get together there is in the nation, somehow he's there. Chad has bred over 40 different species of inverts and fish, which is pretty freaking awesome. He has a degree in marine biology and in aquaculture, and he's going to give an awesome talk about coral and fish nutrition. So with all that said, here's Chad Clayton on coral and fish nutrition.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you guys so much for coming out today and supporting your local fish store. That's awesome. So yeah, my name is Chad Clayton. I work for a company called Reed Mariculture, and reef nutrition is one of our product lines. I've been with the company for about 14 years. My career has primarily been in aquaculture, so I'm mostly a fish guy. So I've bred clownfish and dottybacks, cardinals, seahorses, food fish in Hawaii, marine ornamentals in Florida, fish and wildlife. So I've had like this career of fish-related, aquarium-related things, and it's brought me to my current position at Reed Mariculture. I'm a live feed supervisor, so I'm in charge of copepod culture, rotifer culture. I also am in charge of our biosecurity plan, so making sure that we minimize contamination, threats of contamination, things like that. I also do trade shows and presentations, and it's just been an all aquatics career for me. So yeah, all that knowledge brings me to things I'm going to talk about today. So let's dive into this presentation. We're going to talk about fish and coral nutrition, mostly coral nutrition, but we'll get into some of the fish stuff as well. So Reed Mariculture, we're in Silicon Valley. We're in San Jose area. We're in greenhouses. We grow nearly 3 million gallons of marine microalgae, so phytoplankton. Many of you know it as phyto. We are the world's largest producer of marine microalgae. We grow multiple species of algae in our facilities, and we sell it to people that don't want to grow it, basically. Growing algae is a pain in the butt, especially on a massive scale. It's one thing to grow a couple of gallons of algae in your closet. It's a whole nother ball game when it's millions of gallons. And so we started back in 1995. That's Tim Reed, the owner of the company, still operates the company. He's our president, very much involved in day-to-day operations, and then this is his wife Lynn. And we lost his father Ed last year, and Ed was very much involved with our day-to-day operations as well. So we're a family-run company. We started back in the 90s. Tim wanted to get into oyster farming, and he wanted to do it in a way that was biosecure, so he wanted to create an inland recirculating aquaculture facility. Making his own water treatment plant, jumping through all the hoops to make sure you disinfect your water and grow oysters. And we're not just talking, grabbing some oysters out of the bay and growing them up. We're talking spawning oysters, males, females, spawning, releasing larvae, growing the larvae, and then, raising them, selling them to market, to a restaurant, somebody that wants to eat them. And he found out along the way that you have to grow algae to do that, because oysters do really well on phytoplankton, on microscopic microalgae. It's one of the best things you can feed them. And these are the things they're consuming out in nature. And so working with UC Davis and some oyster growers, they were like, you know what you should do? They're like, you should just grow the algae and sell it to us, because we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to grow it. We have seasonality issues. We have issues growing all the species that are required to get our animals through metamorphosis and grow them. And so that's kind of when the light bulb went off in Tim's head, and he's like, okay, let's just go that direction. Let's grow algae. Let's find a way to separate the cells from the media, process it, preserve it somehow. Temperature is our preservative, one of our main preservatives, and sell it all over the world to people that don't want to grow it. So that's how we got started. So if you're an oyster, let's say you're an oyster farmer and you've got an inland facility and you're breeding oysters and you're raising larvae and you don't want to grow algae or you can't grow enough of it, that's where we come in. We sell algae. So algae is a huge part of many aspects of aquaculture. And what a lot of farmers like about our stuff is that it's highly concentrated. So we'll talk about concentration in a little bit. The algae is whole cell, but it's no longer viable. So the cells are no longer alive. There's no longer cellular fission. It's no longer replicating itself. There's no more active transport of nutrient and metals and waste and carbon dioxide, things like that, and oxygen being released, things like that. No longer going on. And there's full nutritional value. So that cell wall, when we harvest the algae and it's no longer alive, the cell wall is fully intact. So everything inside that cell is exactly as it was when it was alive. So when something eats it, they get all the nutrition. What's cool about algae is it doesn't, when you harvest it and you put it into a solution like this and you put it in a refrigerator, it doesn't start to really decay. These cell walls are very durable. They're hard to penetrate by bacteria. It takes high temperatures and a lot of bacteria in a really nasty environment to rupture a cell wall of some phytoplankton cells. Biosecure to pathogen free, so the algae is no longer alive. Depending on the species, it can be refrigerated or frozen, so that kills pathogens. Easy to use, liquid suspension, it's easy to measure, things like that. Always available, so we're always producing algae. So customers running out of algae, they call us, they order more, and they can keep their operation going. We've actually helped keep aquaculture going globally and also speed things up as far as bivalve aquaculture. A lot of oyster hatcheries and clam hatcheries globally are looking to go more into these recirculating aquaculture systems versus raising these oysters in bivalves in a coastal region where there's toxins and there's seasonality issues, and it's just very challenging to grow things nowadays in coastal areas. So they want to grow them in aquariums, in big fiberglass tanks, upwelling units where everything stays suspended, and to do all that you need a lot of phytoplankton. You need to either produce your own or you can buy it and use it there. We have some oyster hatcheries on the East Coast that use our algae exclusively. They feed no live algae to their oysters. And that's fantastic stuff. If you're in that world and you understand the challenges of growing algae on a massive scale. And so just to give you an idea of concentration of what we bring to the plate, because we call our foods concentrates. This is called Nano 3600. So the genus is Nanochloropsis, very common species of algae, green. A lot of people will culture it. You can find a starter culture just about anywhere and grow them in 2-liter bottles. Pretty simple stuff. It's a non-motile algae. So in this 1-liter bottle, this is a quart, well, it's almost a liter. It's a quart bottle, is the equivalent of 3,600 liters, so almost 1,000 gallons of live algae at 100 million cells per milliliter. So that giant amount, 1,000 gallons, is all in this 1 liter. And so that's what we say when we say concentrates. That's what we mean. We bring these cells down until they're in like a clay form. We use separators. We spin the algae to separate the media from the cells. And then from there we process it and sell it. So that's primarily what we do and what we're known for. We branched out all over the world, so we sell algae to shrimp farms. There's a lot of shrimp farms in South America that are spawning shrimp, raising the larvae. The larvae do really well on phytoplankton, and there are very specific species that are required, and those are the ones we grow. We basically grow the algae that everybody else grows globally that is required to grow oysters, grow shrimp, grow enrich live feed organisms that are then fed to larval fish. So we grow the little guys. We help the little guys. We're plankton producers, and that's where life begins. Algae is one of the largest producers of oxygen on the planet. I think we get most of our oxygen from algae, and then from forests. And they're called primary producers because they produce things that animals cannot. They produce things like carotenoids, which are pigmentation enhancers, antioxidants. We get these things from blueberries and carrots. They produce fatty acids that are very unique, that cannot be synthesized by animals. And so these animals consume the phytoplankton. They gain all of that enrichment, all of that nutrition, and that makes them nutritional. And so our algae is used to feed the copepods, rotifers, Penaeus venemi shrimp larvae, and then we also sell the algae to shrimp growers. They feed it to brine shrimp, they enrich the brine shrimp with the algae, and then they feed the adult brine shrimp to larger shrimp. And then you've got Crassostrea virginica here, the oysters that are also used, are also fed phytoplankton. So in 2005, we decided to come out with a product called Phyto Feast. We had a lot of hobbyists that were looking to care for non-photosynthetic corals, some non-photosynthetic bivalves. They were very interested in what we were doing, so they reached out to us. And they were like, look, we want to feed microparticle, nutrient-rich foods to our animals that are almost impossible to keep. What can you do for us? And that's where this came into play. And so PhytoFeast was our flagship product. We started selling that to people that knew what they needed. They knew they needed a micro feed, and they wanted one that was natural. Because the cells are in liquid suspension, so they look natural. They're just not alive. And that's really where it all began. So I'll get into more of the reef nutrition products later. Okay, so let's get into food. So this is a very complicated subject. As I'm sure many of you have stories of, my fish eats one thing and then it doesn't eat another, and I feed my corals, but I don't actually really see them eating it unless I do time-lapse photography, or if I sit in front of my coral and watch it react and open up, which you can't see, if you're patient enough. And there's also just so many different foods out there. It can be very complicated. So we're just going to focus on reef nutrition foods and why we carry what we carry, and most of it was just derived from people wanting things, the hobbyists wanting like an oyster egg, or can you sell us a fish egg? How about copepods? How about mysis shrimp? Brine shrimp, what can you do for us? So this was all demanded on us from our customers, and we decided to go with it. So we slowly grew our line. So we're going to talk about what corals and fish eat out in nature. Corals are eating all kinds of things. They're eating bacteria, they're eating phytoplankton, dissolved organic matter, where they really get some phosphorus and nitrogen. They're eating zooplankton, larvae, all different kinds of larvae, bivalve larvae, fish larvae, invertebrate larvae, coral larvae. They're all eating each other, basically. It's a pretty rough life out there. Eggs, anytime something spawns, there's immediately fish and animals trying to eat the eggs as fast as possible. And that's why a lot of fish in the ocean spawn every single day and broadcast their eggs out for the world, unlike clownfish and demersal spawners. And corals have symbionts. Some corals have zooxanthellae, which are little microalgae that live inside their tissue, and that algae provides them with sugar and the sunlight, and the algae is inside the tissue, so it's safe. It's got a safe place to live inside the coral tissue, and then it needs light to photosynthesize and produce energy. And so there are plenty of corals with symbionts, a lot of SPS, things like that. And then fish, some corals eat fish, and a lot of fish eat fish. So yeah, it's eat or be eaten kind of scenarios out there, and most of these animals are opportunistic. I mean, they turn their nose up to certain foods that we try to feed them, but in the wild, they're it's just do whatever you can to survive and make it. So we can see how fish eat, but because we can clearly see them eating. But how do corals eat? There's different modes, different kinds of corals, different feeding methods. You've got your tentacular methods, which is the tentacles with the little nematocysts, those little stinging cells, which are like little coiled up barbs that suddenly release and shoot into the prey item, and that way they can stun it and then slowly bring it in and capture it and bring it in and digest it. So that's one method of consumption. Mesotherial, which is when the coral just expels its insides, its guts, and they use these to kill each other too, the mesentery. But they'll use those to feed, so you sometimes see that come out of them, which is really bizarre. Mucus feeding is very common. Mushroom corals, scalemia, they use mucus feeding. So you'll see if you ever target feed them, you can target feed them, and you'll see the food just stick to them. Even though you can't really see anything on their tissue, there's a mucus layer there, and it gets stuck in the mucus layer, and then they kind of bind it up and reel it into the mouth. And I've got some time-lapse videos that'll show that. And then there's other feed modes and things like that. But these are the most common ways that corals are going to consume food that you're putting in the tank. And this is these animals are always open for consuming, unless unless they're closed for some reason. Some corals will open up at night, particularly. Some will open up during the day. Some corals that will open up only at night, you can stimulate them to open up during the day with different food types, and we'll talk about those food types. Yeah, how do we cater to their dietary needs? Well, so basically, you provide the optimal environmental conditions for them. The lighting, the water filtration, water movement, all these things that you see when you see an aquarium, all the bells and whistles, and then you just throw everything at them, including the kitchen sink, so to speak. And that's kind of the approach that we took. Was there are all these great foods out there? Which ones do we do? Let's just take it slow and see which ones stick, so to speak. So let's talk about eggs. Eggs are a very good food source, very enriching for animals, very stimulating. There's fatty acids, amino acids, things that animals recognize as food sources. And the particle size is very small because for SPS corals with very small polyps, they require a very small food particle size. And so eggs do a really good job of providing that. You've got oyster eggs over here, which are very much smaller than, let's say, cod and haddock eggs. We get our oyster eggs from oyster growers in the Pacific Northwest. We buy the ovaries, and so we get the roe sacs from the oysters. We break them down into very small particle sizes, about 1 to 200 micron, which is microscopic and macroscopic. And that's what we put into a product called Oyster Feast, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And then cod eggs we get from the Alaska fishery. So finicky fish love eggs. So fish eggs, we have a product called roe, real oceanic eggs. We played on the word roe, yeah. Right on, a fan. These eggs are pretty good for getting finicky fish to eat. Even mandarin dragonet. Somebody was telling me that their mandarin was eating the fish eggs versus a dead copepod, which is kind of funny, considering it's a copepod, it's just not alive, but they'll eat the fish eggs. So this is something that a lot of people will use to feed. Let's say you're an importer or a distributor or a store owner, and you want to get your fish to eat, or they're in quarantine. This is a great source of nutrition for them to feed them eggs. And then you've got things like anthias and butterflies and a lot of other really finicky fish that do are really hard to get to eat. And this is a really good one to get them going. And then once you get them on eggs, you can get them on other things. So it's like a gateway food for your wild caught animals. And that's for wild caught. If you're getting captive bred fish, they're likely going to eat most things that you can throw at them, because they're getting fed a variety at those fish farms. Okay, so which corals and inverts benefit from eggs? It's just most of them. Our oyster feast is, it's SPS corals, acros, things like that, all the way up to LPS corals, anemones, sponges, filter feeding, feather duster worms, things like that. They'll all consume this food. It's just loaded full of eggs. And you can see here, that's the coloration you're seeing from the eggs, very small. And it just elicits a very strong feeding response. So this product is used by a lot of, not just hobbyists, but people that want to grow corals quickly, people are fragging corals, growing them quickly so they can get them into the market. It's also being used by people spawning corals in captivity. So the Florida Aquarium is using this product. They're spawning corals in captivity. The Horniman Museum out in the UK, which is in the London area, they're spawning corals in captivity in a tiny museum called the Horniman Museum, and they also use this product in their feeding schedules for their corals. So it does, it's not just great for your home aquarium and the corals in it, but people are using it for very sensitive things like spawning corals, and which was something that was pretty much unheard of 20 years ago. Intentionally, you can spawning corals by accident happens, but intentionally spawning them and raising them is a whole different ball game. And so yeah, Oyster Feast, that's a great one. If you're looking for an all-around food for your corals and your inverts, that's a good one to get your hands on. And then we get this one, the roe. These are the fish eggs. You can see here, that's the product there. And just these eggs contain things like fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, DHA, EPA. These things are really good for the brain, the eyes, different metabolic function, things like that. So, and again, very small particle size. Fish love to eat it. Corals can eat it. So that that's the eggs are good. They're not just for breakfast either. You can feed them at any time. So phytoplankton, so we'll get into, talking about phytoplankton. This is something that we specialize in, and we're able to provide it consistently to people that are working with animals that really do well on it, that consume it and thrive and live for many years, or maybe you're culturing copepods and you need phytoplankton. Same kind of thing. So small particle size. The largest cell is tetracellular, and that's still smaller than a blood cell. And so we're talking a very small scale here. Variety of nutrition. Every species of algae has its own nutritional properties. Some are very rich in sterols, like cholesterol. Some are very rich in fatty acids, like DHA. Some are, and then others are rich in other fatty acid types. And so we like to provide a variety of those species. Just put them all into one bottle. That way your animals can get everything from all the species.
You allow to ship to every country?
We don't ship it to every country, but we do ship internationally. Singapore, Turkey, Europe. We got a distributor in France, UK. We're trying to get into Australia. That's a tough market to get into. Okay, so what eats phyto? Well, most of us are familiar with this animal. It's the ridgeback clam. A lot of people mistakenly call it a scallop. They consume phytoplankton. This is a non-photosynthetic organism, so they need to eat food to live. So phytoplankton is an excellent food source for this animal. NPS corals, so any non-photosynthetic coral, octocorals, tubastria, a lot of these gorgonians, things like that, benefit from phytoplankton feedings. And even SPS corals and photosynthetic corals will also consume it. And then sponges. So if you can get your hand on some sponges, or you get some sponge hitchhikers, they do really well on phytoplankton. The zooplankton will eat phyto. Your copepods, amphipods, isopods, all these little critters, possum shrimp, mysis shrimp, all these little critters that come as, you either buy them or they come as hitchhikers. And then inverts, like feather duster worms, things like that. So phytoplankton can provide a lot of nutrition to those animals. And so this is the Phyto Feast, and I just show you guys all the sizes we carry. And then you can see here we've got the different genera here, the Pavlova, Isochrysis. These are all different species of algae. Most of them we haven't gone full species, just genus. But these are the ones that are most commonly used in aquaculture. So we're growing them anyway. We might as well bottle them up and sell them to people that want to feed to these hard to feed animals. So those are the types of algae that we use, and then everything else on there. The labels all have feeding instructions and things like that on them. And all of our products are refrigerated, so there's also different shelf lives for them, and there's a best by date on the label of every bottle. And then we also have feeding instructions, how much to add. We always recommend you start off conservatively. You don't want to pollute the tank, obviously. And if you're a heavy feeder, then do more water changes and have great waste export. That's all I got to say. Have big skimmers, have sock filters, roller filters, whatever. Anything you can to get the waste out. What goes in must come out. So can you pollute a tank with our foods? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you dumped in an entire 6-ounce bottle of Phyto Feast into any one of these tanks, the whole tank would turn green. You wouldn't be able to see anything, and you would have to get that out before it starts breaking down and causing problems. Be conservative, and it's liquid, so it's nice. You can measure the dose and be consistent. Okay, so copepods. This is another food item that's very good to feed to your corals and your fish. Copepods are one of the most abundant animals on the planet. They are found in virtually every aquatic environment, from the bottom of the ocean to rivers and streams and mountains. The most copepods on the planet are parasitic. Obviously, the ones we work with are not. If they were, that wouldn't work out, because there's fish in the tank, and we don't want them killing the fish. So we work with coastal species that live in estuaries, live in coastlines. And now those are the ones that we sell into the hobby, because those are the ones that are likely going to live in a tank. And this is regarding live copepods. We also sell dead ones. And so we want copepods that are durable, are used to fluctuations in environmental parameters, can be grown at high density on a commercial scale. And so that's, we started working with copepods about 14 years ago, because we knew it was an animal that was going to be important in aquaculture, as well as the hobby, but more important for aquaculture, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But we found that it was great for reef tanks as well. Copepods are kind of like a cleanup crew animal. They'll eat diatoms. They're known to eat cyano. They're known to eat dinoflagellates, organic waste, each other. They cannibalize their own young. So if you got plenty of habitat, you're good. You don't have to worry about that. They have a nutritional profile that's just superior to any other animal you can feed to your corals or your fish. These are animals that can synthesize, they can convert vitamins, they can convert fatty acids in their bodies, and they store carotenoids, which are very good for pigmentation, act as antioxidants, and so these animals just have they're like a superfood. They're also easy to digest. They have enzymes within their own tissue that help to break down themselves when they're consumed. And this is what people in aquaculture really like. So you guys are probably familiar with the yellow tangs being captive bred out in Hawaii by a company called Biota. That company uses copepods to feed to their larval yellow tangs. As soon as the yellow tang hatches, it is smaller than an eyelash. I mean, you can barely see this fish. It is incredible how small it is. And they do have some yolk sacs, so they go through what is called endogenous feeding. So they've hatched, they're swimming in the water, but they're living off of their yolk. Once they're done with their yolk, then their jaw kind of gets more formed, and they start exogenous feeding, which means eating things around them, outside of their body. And copepods are a very good source of nutrition for these animals. This is what they are out in nature in the pelagic zone. This is what they're hunting down. Are copepods, larval forms of bivalves, larval oysters, larval anything. Anything tiny that has a certain jerky movement, or they can recognize as a live food, a prey item. And copepods also have this very unique movement where they kind of move really quickly, or they kind of do this. And that is very stimulating to these fish. They have huge eyes when they're larvae, and those eyes pick up on that movement, and they recognize it as a food source, and then they hunt it down. And so copepods are just they're pivotal for aquaculture. You wouldn't see yellow tangs, you wouldn't see blue tangs, you wouldn't see pomalabs doing the different angelfish. Forget what they're doing, all kinds of really cool angelfish. You wouldn't see any of those if it wasn't for copepod aquaculture. So in our aquarium, what eats copepods? Pretty much everything. Pretty much everything will eat a copepod. But we have fish like the mandarin dragonet, which, if they're wild caught, they're coming in from the wild, and all they want to eat is something alive. So copepods are a great food source for them. And this is something that can hone their natural instincts. They can cruise around in your reef tank and peck at the rock and consume these animals, these little copepods that are going to be in your reef tank. And this is something that can sustain this animal for many years. There are people that have mandarins spawning in their tanks thanks to a good, healthy zooplankton population. You can also get these fish to eat things that are dead. You can get them to eat pellets. There are people that breed mandarins. Biota they also work with these. And they wean them off of the live copepods, off of live feeds, onto pellets like TDO. They use our TDO in their facilities. They use frozen foods like copepods, mysis shrimp, things like that. So if you buy these guys captive bred, then they're more likely to take something that's not alive, which is great. But you still want to have live copepods in the tank because it's their natural instinct to constantly forage. They're very voracious predators, so they will constantly be seeking out something to eat while the lights are on. And then corals as well. Corals on a reef, when the sun sets and copepods and zooplankton animals are out and there's just this soup that's occurring on the reef, the corals come out, they open up, and they start eating these things. So corals will also eat copepods. And so I know some people that culture copepods and live rotifers to strictly feed to their corals, to give them something alive, something that they can capture and kill and consume. And it's nutritious. So it's just different modes of nutrition, and that's one of them. So this is one of our this is our most popular product, the Tigger Pod, Tigriopus californicus. These guys are native to California, Alaska, Baja Peninsula of Mexico. Huge, vast range along North America. Very hardy animal, very durable. They live in splash pools. So if you ever go to the coast, you'll see the tidal zone, and then you'll see these pools that are above the tidal zone before you get to the terrestrial zone. And that's where these guys live. Very harsh environment, very tough animals, an animal that we like to work with in aquaculture. So we've been growing these guys for about 16 years. We've domesticated them to our greenhouse facilities. So we grow them in big vats, big tubs, and we grow them in greenhouses so they get natural sunlight, and we feed them phytoplankton because we have millions of gallons of it. And that's one of the things that, that was another light bulb that went off. It's like, we have all this phytoplankton, what can we do with it? What else can we do with it besides selling it? Let's grow copepods. Let's grow live feed organisms. Let's make them available to people in aquaculture so that they don't have to go to the ocean and find them themselves. So it's just something that's very convenient for people, and it helps to accelerate the process. It helps to accelerate aquaculture. It helps us to keep our beloved animals alive. So yeah, tiger pods, you typically find them in the refrigerator in a store because they can tolerate low temperatures, which is something we can use to our advantage. We pack a lot of them in there. There's over 3,000 animals per bottle. And so at cooler temperatures, there's more oxygen in the bottle, and also lower temperatures, they're more subdued. They're not in full metabolic function. So their oxygen demand, their nutritional demands are very subdued. So that's why you see them in a fridge. They're perfectly fine in a reef tank. You may put them in, see them for a few days, and then you'll never see them again. And that's just because they're hiding in all the nooks and crannies in your tank, and they're getting eaten at the same time. And so typically tiger pods don't really, for long term, they don't tend to populate long term because of predation and their complex life cycle. So this is something that people will routinely add to their systems if they have fish that are really finicky. Like this one, or seahorses, pipefish also fall into that category. And you can see here's a video of the product and just the bottle. You guys can see them here in the fridge. And then these are microscopic images that I took. So this is the female. This is how they carry their eggs. And they carry them in one cluster. And they just need one reproductive occurrence, one mating, one courting. The females store the sperm, and they just fertilize their own embryos as they go until they reach the end of their life. And that's how they do it. And the males have this modified antennae, which have little hooks on them, and that they use to hook onto the females while they're going through their final molt, and then they mate, and then they move on. So that's basically what they look like under the microscope.
How long is like an uninterrupted life cycle?
They live for about 60 to 70 days. Yeah, and it's all the temperature dependent. The colder the temperature, the longer they'll live. Okay, and then along those lines of tiger pods, so this is tiger feast. These are not live tiger pods. There are roughly 50, I think it's like 53 bottles of tiger pods in this bottle. So there's that much biomass, but they're not alive anymore. So this is a concentrate, very unique. 100% aquacultured animals, not taken from the ocean. So it's very unique in this business in this industry, to find a product like this that's purely aquacultured, copepods. And this is a great one for corals and fish and getting those finicky fish off of live feed organisms. And then this is the other copepod that I just started working with about 5 years ago. Very popular in aquaculture. Apocyclops panamensis is the species. This animal is found in the equatorial regions and subtropical regions of the Atlantic Ocean. They're found in the Gulf of Mexico, all throughout Cayman Islands. They're in freshwater, estuary, and full salt water. So very tough animal to work with. Again, one that we like to work with in aquaculture because of their durability. And so we wanted to come out with this one because these guys are smaller. They're about a third the size. They reproduce faster, so they're more likely to populate your tank and be in there long term. There's a female. You can see different reproductive strategy. They hold the eggs in two masses on their urogenital segment. And then this is what the nauplii look like. So copepods go through these, at least these ones I'm talking about, 12 different life stages. So they molt like a shrimp or a crab or a lobster. They shed an exoskeleton and they grow. And so this is what they look like when they're larval. And then once they get through 6 of these stages, they go through metamorphosis. They become what's called a copepodite, which is a juvenile. And then they mature and they reach a terminal molt. And then they no longer molt. Once they become sexually mature, they're done. They're done molting and growing. So there's your reproductive life cycle of copepods. Okay, and then we'll get into some of the other copepod products that we carry. So pack pods, this is a newer one that we came out with. This is an animal that's in the same order of copepods as the previous one. So this is a cyclopoid copepod. Cyclopoids are very common. They're found in the Great Lakes. They're found in freshwater habitats all over the world, saltwater estuaries, mangrove forests, or mangrove regions, coastal regions. The cyclopoid copepods are pretty much cosmopolitan. They're just everywhere. And so it's a great animal to work with. No matter where you're at.
Cycloplees?
Cyclopes is similar. Yeah, that's a cyclopoid copepod. So pack pods are a copepod concentrate, so not alive, and this is a great one. We've got some NPS keepers that are raving about this. Also importers and store owners that are looking to get mandarins and finicky fish to eat. This is another good one to feed to them, because copepods are just a great food source for these animals, and they recognize that. And then you get into the arctopods. So these are a little bit larger. These are an Arctic, so to speak, copepod. So they're collected off of Scandinavia. You can see that red coloration. Copepods are notorious for storing carotenoids, which give them that pigmentation, and they get that coloration from the algae. They get that the algae has pigmentation. They get it from there, and then they convert it into some of these red carotenoids that we see. And algae will do that as well. But that's what makes them so nutritious. That's one of the things that makes them incredibly nutritious, are those carotenoids. And then we've got also some more zooplankton items that we sell that are very common. Brine shrimp. Most of us, if you've been in this hobby for a long time, brine shrimp. It's been around since I was a kid in the 80s when I had my first saltwater tank, San Francisco Bay brand. And then this is PE mysis. And so we carry two products that contain these animals. And these animals are fully enriched. These guys were grown in Australia in large ponds. They were fed phytoplankton that is rich in beta carotene. So again, another carotenoid. And so they're fully enriched with fatty acids and carotenoids. And then these guys are, up in Canada, they're eating the phytoplankton and then nuri and piscine energetics. They get out there in the middle of the night when these animals come up to the surface, and they harvest them, and because they're coming up to feed. And so these guys are fully enriched as well. And these are great alternatives. A lot of people like these because they don't have to thaw them out. There's no flat packs. There's no rinsing. So these are great alternatives to the frozen stuff. It's the same exact thing as PE mysis. It's just no longer frozen. Okay, we just talked about all of our basically whole organism, whole animal foods. And that's another thing we really liked about our line was everything's fully intact. These aren't like, milled up pieces of stuff and dried out in some kind of weird conglomeration. You can actually see the animals in these products. You can see the eggs. You can't see the algae, of course, but it's definitely there because of the coloration. And you're more than welcome to grab a microscope and look at things under microscopes as well. It's kind of neat to do that. So now we'll get on to the dry food aspect of what we do. We offer a dry food called TDO because there's people that are in aquaculture that find this food very appealing. It's very useful. It comes in a variety of sizes, so it starts off as a powder and goes into larger extruded pellets. It's used as a weaning diet. So let's say you're breeding clownfish. You're raising your clownfish on what are called rotifers, these little live animals. And you want to get them off of the live rotifers. So as the clownfish is growing, they go through metamorphosis. So they change from being a larvae to what they're going to look like as an adult. So they start getting their stripes, their pigmentation. And this is right around when you want to start getting them off of live feed organisms. And that's where a dry food like TDO comes into play. It's very palatable for these animals. It contains things like squid, krill, fish meal. Very palatable, high protein, good fat content. Things that are very good for larval fish, post-metamorphic fish, all the way up to broodstock. And so we came out with TDO years ago, primarily to sell to breeders. And we just introduced it into the hobby. People with corals, people with farms, people with freshwater systems, people breeding freshwater fish, they love this food. So you can see here there's an image of the powder and then some of the granules, extruded pellets. These are the different sizes. This is like a sample pack of all the sizes that we call a hobbyist breeder pack. And all this stuff's on our website. You can see here, so what we did was we took the food to Virginia Tech. We said, we've got a lot of clownfish breeders that are using this stuff. What is the optimal concentration of this carotenoid? So there's a carotenoid that we top dress the food with. And it's called astaxanthin. So this carotenoid really enhances pigmentation in clownfish, makes them look more wild type. It's kind of like a classic example of an animal that requires a carotenoid in their diet is a flamingo. So flamingos in nature are consuming these little shrimp that have eaten phytoplankton. And so the shrimp get consumed by the flamingo, and all those little phytopigments, those carotenoids in that shrimp, get into the flamingo and result in that plumage, that coloration that we see. If you remove that from their diet, that plumage, that coloration goes away. And so this is something that's similar with some of our marine animals. Clownfish can be this way. If they're captive bred and they're fed a subpar diet, they will look kind of faded. They'll look brown or yellow if they're not fed properly. And so this was a guy that did a study for us at Virginia Tech. They studied the optimal top dressing concentration of astaxanthin, and they found what works, what makes clownfish look more wild type. And so we went with that. So this is a customer that had a clownfish, decided he wanted to start feeding them TDO. A month later, you can see the pigmentation is thoroughly better. They've gone from this pale yellow to a more rich orange, almost reddish coloration, looking more like their wild type counterpart. So this is something this is one of the things that TDO brings to the plate for fish nutrition. It's also just has a huge variety of uses. I don't have a video here, but I know a guy who's breeding poison dart frogs, and he said it's the wonder food for their tadpoles. And it's because of all those sizes and the nutritional qualities of this food that it can be used on things like poison dart frogs, axolotls. I know people feed it to chickens. And so we get into the, some of the more difficult animals. You've got your holy grail filefish over here, your orange spot filefish, which are primarily coral eaters. They will eat your acropora all day long, no problem. And to get them to do something like this, to eat a pellet, which takes a lot of training, is just remarkable. And this is a breeding pair. This was a friend of mine that had a breeding pair of them, and he's like, "You're not going to believe this. They're eating this TDO with gusto." And so that was just that was remarkable to see. And then here we have a time-lapse video by a friend of mine who works at Bulk Reef Supply, Chad Vossen. He owns a company that breeds fish and sea urchins and stuff like that. And so this was just a scolie kind of reacting to the TDO and just feeding on it, and it's just amazing to see that. And then you can see here another coral kind of using the mucus capture method, so you can see the food is just, you can't even, you don't even see what it's stuck to. The mucus is so clear, and it just works it into its mouth and gobbles it up. And so this, this food is really great for target feeding and some LPS corals, and because it comes in a variety of sizes, you can feed the smallest powder size to SPS corals, and then the larger sizes to larger corals. And then here we have garden eels. We had a store owner that had garden eels in the display, and they were eating the TDO. As the TDO rolled along the gravel, they were picking it right off the bottom. And he was like, "That's just remarkable stuff." So yeah, and I know a guy that's got some seahorses, and he says, "My seahorses eat it." I said, "Well, you got to get that on video, because that's really out there. To get seahorses to eat a pellet would just be remarkable." And then yeah, here we have the freshwater. So this is a flower horn cichlid, and this is a before and after. And this is a guy who breeds them down in LA, and he's just like, "Yeah, it's just amazing. It's a wonder food." He said he sells these animals so fast now because of their coloration. And we even have stores that feed it in-house. They feed it to all their freshwater fish, all their saltwater fish. And the other great thing about the nutritional quality of this food is it makes these animals more robust. It's like what Kenny was saying about feeding your animals, making them stronger, making them more robust, making them more durable. And that's what a dry food like TDO does. It makes these fish less susceptible to all these stressors that can happen. Temperature swings, pH swings, being put in a bag and shipped across the world kind of stuff. Good food helps to minimize those things. It's the same thing with us. If we eat well and we put the right things in our body, we're healthier. So it's the same thing that applies with the animals in our glass boxes. So how do we feed our reef? So yeah, there are people who will spot feed. I know some people that are pretty much spot feeders. That's all they do. They have a lot of time on their hands, because it takes a lot of time to spot feed. It's especially if you've got a large system with a lot of corals. And so that's one way to do it. This is like it's really hard to see, but there's a very small tridactyd clam, and this is somebody that took a Tupperware container, put a hole in it, and this is their target feeding device, and they shoot the phytoplankton into this bell container, and that way the animal can consume it all, or as much as it can, before they remove that, and the phytoplankton drifts around. That's one method that is called a concentrated feeding method, and so that way the animal really maximizes its consumption of whatever you're feeding it. And then, of course, there's the broadcast feeding method, which is just measure the food or take the bottle, squirt it by a power head, and it blasts it all over the place. Some people will turn off their recirc systems, turn off their skimmer. You can put a skimmer on feed mode for 30 minutes to an hour, and that way, your filters aren't working against you, and your animals can eat that stuff before your filters eat it, so to speak. And then there's other people who just go to the next level and they build their entire system around a refrigerator and then they build their system. And so this is a guy in the Bay Area. He's part of the club. He's a great guy. I did a presentation at his house and I got to see this in person. So yeah, he basically ran his return line through the fridge. And then he's got his GHL dosers up top, which are great. Those things can handle refrigerator temperatures all day long. I use them to feed to my Copepods. Phenomenal dosing units. You can dose every 9 minutes with a GHL doser. So if you've got fish like Anthias or you want to grow corals like crazy, you get a setup like this, and you're like the ocean. You're feeding nonstop. So there's always something in the water column for these animals to consume, which is ideal. A lot of us just pulse feed our animals, but when you can do this and feed them continuously, you can keep some pretty hard animals that they're typically really difficult to keep, like certain Anthias and other inverts and corals. You can keep them going with a system like this. And what's great about our products is we use a compound called sodium alginate, so that's just a thickening agent, and it helps keep everything suspended. So while these bottles are in the fridge, you don't have to agitate them with like a shaker table or a little magnetic stir. You have to do any of that. Everything stays in suspension. So he's got his rigid tubing down in here. The rigid tubing just pulls the food up into the doser, and then this acts as a venturi, so it's just sucking the food in as it doses. And so this is just one way I've seen people do it. I know the Steinhardt Aquarium they use our foods, and they would set everything up in like a thermos with some ice, and they would make a cocktail, put it in the thermos, set up their dosing system to that, and then it would feed out of that. And it was just a little insulated container that kept the food cold, because refrigeration is basically the preservative of our products. We don't pasteurize anything because we don't want to destroy it, and we don't want to add a lot of chemicals because we don't want you putting chemicals in your tank. So refrigeration is basically the main mode of preservation for our products. And as far as our best buy dates, our expiration, stuff like that, if you're wondering, we're very conservative. And so as long as the food looks like it did when you first got it and it smells like it did, you're good to go. You can just keep using it past expiration. A lot of public aquariums use our foods on their NPS displays and on a lot of the coral systems. And they all come up with different ways to do it. And a lot of public aquariums have their own live feeds areas. If you ever do a behind the scenes at Monterey Bay Aquarium, they've got algae tubes growing, they've got brine shrimp, they've got copepods. I do a lot of consultation with them, and it's really fun to see how they're doing things and what they're using them on. They're breeding jellies, which is really, really cool. I highly recommend if you can do behind the scenes and see their jelly breeding systems. They're chrysal tanks, which are these slow moving, tanks. It's really neat. They're very pungent. So like people that are let's say, there's people that grow their own phyto, that a live phytoplankton culture with a certain limited amount of cells per milliliter has a very different smell than like 100 of those containers into one little bottle, which is basically our phyto feast.
It doesn't smell rotten. It just smells, but not rotten.
Right. Yeah. Unless you smell rotten eggs. If you smell rotten eggs, then you need to move on. Yeah, you need to throw it away. So just reaching the tail end of my presentation here. You can check out our website. We've got testimonials. We're on social media, Instagram, Facebook. Really fun places to be if you're a hobbyist. Yeah,
They're bigger than their retail.
Yeah. These? You mean these containers?
Yeah, how do you get the...
Yeah, those are the 16-ounce containers.
Are they retail or they're...
Yeah, those are retail. Yeah, so we sell 6, 16-ounce, and 32-ounce.
Maybe they're just not in stores. You can order online or something?
Sometimes you can find different sizes. Like he's got 16-ounce. Yeah, he's got them here. So it depends on the store and the customer base.
Do you guys sell this system?
No, we do not. No, we thought about it, but the problem is where you put it. Where do you put it? Right? I mean, you look under people's displays. There's no space to do anything. So it can be tricky, especially if you're going to be running your return line through the thing and stuff like that. So to create like a turnkey unit would be challenging. It would have to be modified. It would have to be to spec, so to speak. And we just don't have the time to do that.
On an all-in-one tank would work since all your
Yeah.
stuff or anything underneath.
Yeah, I guess we could work with somebody that makes all-in-one systems and design a fridge for that kind of thing, yeah.
This is a hang-on wall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's great that, refrigerator technology is great these days. There's some really nice little units, and there's,
It's done with like 6-pack style refrigerators.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the really small, like little Coca-Cola ones or whatever. And there's even wine chiller, where you put the wine bottle in and it's electronically chilled. You can also, I know people that will use those as well to keep the food chilled while it's dosing out. Yeah, and you can double duty it. You can have your Chardonnay in there and then switch it out for your oyster feast.
Make sure you remember.
Make sure, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can be challenging to dose our foods because of the refrigeration aspect. But the TDO, the dry food, great stuff for vacations, weekends. You can use it in an auto feeder. I just recommend below the auto feeder, put a magnetic ring under there or some kind of feeding ring. They're so cheap, they're so easy to get your hands on, and that'll keep the food from going down your overflow. Because depending on the size of the TDO, the granules will float. They do trap air, and they're meant to float because in a fish hatchery, you want the fish coming up to the surface to eat the food, and so they're meant to float, whereas the extruded pellets, the medium and the large, tend to sink faster. So get a feeding ring, put it under your auto feeder, and you're good to go. Yeah.
Are there any plans for some kind of like a cocktail or soup of Copepods similar to Phytoplankton but for Copepods?
Right. We thought about that. Oh, the band does here. All right. So we thought about that, and we just so with the apex pods and the tigger pods, the apex pods don't tolerate refrigeration temperature, so they wouldn't be able to be combined and put in a refrigerator because they would die within 3 days. Right now we're only working with 2 Copepods that are applicable for marine aquarium. There's another one, marine aquariums. There's another one we're working with that's used by people raising yellow tangs and things like that. But there are other species we're looking to do, and we may make a cocktail as long as the species that we combine get along in the bottle and have similar parameter requirements. It could definitely happen. But the 2 species that we have, they fill a lot of gaps in what people need for specific animals and specific needs. Like the apex pods are great to increase or improve your biodiversity, and because once they're in, they're going to breed, they're going to live there, they're going to be in your tank forever. Whereas the tigger pods are less likely, but they're a larger animal, great food item. There's some trade-offs.
Just for the feeding part though, it doesn't have to be live, but I'm guessing that it sounds like only a couple of species are particularly relevant for tropical reef aquaria.
Yeah. And as far as our other products, we're not going to really combine anything together. The different products require different chemistry, different pH and stuff in the liquid suspension, and so we want to keep them separate. And also people like that's like that. They can, I want to feed a copepod and a fish egg today. And they can just do those 2 things, combine them, and then feed them out. And you can mix and match. You get more flexibility and more specific use if you have animals that require copepods, things like that. So, yeah. Any more questions? Yeah, go ahead.
My question, like, if you take the roti and let's say the roti feeds, can you actually put them? I mean, I know you can show them together at the same time, but can you actually combine them long enough? Because I'm actually building a similar refrigerator to that you can like just keep them in one container.
Yeah.
Mix them up a bit, but then I don't know how that works.
And so we do have customers that combine our foods, but they feed them out rapidly.
Okay.
So within 5 to 7 days, that food combination is being fed out, and then you're remaking that cocktail, so to speak.
Within like a week.
But you just have just be vigilant at first to make sure it's not causing any spoilage, because we're just not sure. These are things we've never done because we've never really had a reason to. But yeah, there are people that do it, and we haven't heard any complaints. Just short-term stuff. Yeah. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, what are some tips for getting copepods to reproduce and keeping a sustainable population?
Yeah, tips. Yeah, tips for getting copepods to reproduce. Yeah, so it's, you know, when you're starting a new tank, that's a great time to get some copepods into the tank for sure. You have no predators at that point. And copepods can handle high ammonia. They can handle pH swings. These are very tough animals. I mean, I've certainly put them through the ringer with what I do. They get exposed to a lot of different swings and things like that. So definitely a new tank, you know, once you start reaching the ugly phase, as a lot of people like to call it, sometimes we don't, some people can avoid that, but you start seeing diatoms, things growing, you know, on the glass, algae on the rocks, that's typically a good time to start getting pods into the tank. Because they'll eat those diatoms, that's a good food source for them. You can also supplement their diet with phytoplankton, liquid suspension phyto. And so, you know, that's, and then, you know, not adding a pod eater for a year is a good idea. Letting that tank settle in, you know, reach an equilibrium, let that ecosystem evolve. You know, let the bacterial populations battle it out and finally come to an equilibrium. Because there's so much flux happening in a new tank that you just want to let things settle in and get settled down, because when you add that pod predator, you want to make sure, you want to be certain that, you know, that your system is seasoned, so to speak, and you can support that animal. I always recommend with mandarins, take it slow and steady with an animal like that. Don't get ahead of the game. And also, you want a bigger system for a mandarin. You want a lot of pod habitat. You want these zooplankton animals to have tons of places to hide, surfaces to crawl on, and that way, an animal like a mandarin that can eat thousands of these copepods in a day. I quarantined a mandarin, and it was eating a whole bottle of tigerpods a day. That was 3,000 tigerpods a day. And there was no habitat in the system, of course, right? So it was, you know, it was easy for that animal to consume those pods. But with a lot of habitat, those animals have a better chance at, you know, escaping predation and reproducing themselves. You know, people that have refugiums, that will do a refugium, that's a good place to have copepods reproduce and grow. You just got to be careful that the refugium doesn't turn into a pollution source for your system. That's the only problem that I have with refugiums, is they tend to be a waste sink, and you just got to make sure that, you know, things are staying, you know, stirred up and mixed up in those systems. But that's also a good place, and they'll live on macroalgae, you know, all the like gracilaria and caulerpa and all these different kinds of macroalgae. They'll live on that stuff. They'll eat the bacterial film off of macroalgae. They'll eat any phytoplankton, epiphytic phytoplankton that's growing on macroalgae. So those are all good things. And of course, if you have no pod predators, you know, butterflies, wrasses, mandarins, pipefish, things like that. I know anthias will pick at rocks. If you don't have any of those predators, then yeah, you know, you're just going to have a nice, healthy zooplankton population for sure. And then you know, identifying whether it's a success or not can be challenging. You know, I put them in. You know, a year later, I'm still not seeing them. You know, some people will look on the glass. You'll see, you know, you can get some brown algae, some film, biofilm growing on your glass, and you'll see little white specks. And you sit there long enough, and you see them move. And then you're like, okay, yeah. So they're there, yeah. Because on the rocks, you just can't see them unless they're an isopod. So isopods look like ants, look like a kind of a larger size ant, and they're a pod. Pod meaning foot for anyone that's curious. In Latin, it means foot. So we try to be specific when we talk about pods. So there's isopods, which are hitchhikers. They're kind of ubiquitous in pet stores. You can get them on Reef Rock. They're pretty much everywhere. And then there's amphipods, which are much larger crustaceans, little shrimp-looking guys. And you've probably seen them kind of scurrying on the rocks and hiding in your filter, and they'll get into your sponge filters and stuff like that. So, yeah, you can support a lot of different species and families of pods in a system with enough habitat and enough patience. But yeah, it's good to just, you know, let things mature, so to speak, before you add pod predators. Yeah.
So is there any benefit from feeding the pods that you have in the bottles, like before you feed them? So adding some like phytofeeds to them before you feed your animals? Is there a benefit to that? Or?
Yeah, there's, you know, I know a guy who he sets up. He services tanks. He sets up tanks for clients. He's in Missouri, and he does something called the bug bomb method, where he cycles a person's tank with copepods and phytoplankton, and so he'll just throw all these tigerpods into their sump and just feed them phytoplankton. Just keep the water nice and green in there and really get them reproducing And it also helps to cycle the tank. You know, there's ammonia and things and stuff that happens. And so, yeah, I grow the copepods on phytoplankton. So if you're going to supplement what they're already eating in the tank with a bottle of phytofeast, that's great. They'll absolutely consume that, even before you have any other mouths to feed. And then as you get corals and other filter feeders, that's great. Then you've got food for them as well. And yeah, copepods are just they eating dinoflagellates and red slime algae and cyano and things like that. It's pretty remarkable that they'll do that. To what extent they'll do that is tough to say, because on a biological level, all of our tanks are different. Bacteria populations, zooplankton populations, corals, all these animals that we have things can vary because of that. And so it's definitely good to have them in the system, but I wouldn't just add those and say, oh, they'll take care of everything, and not add urchins and snails and hermit crabs and all these other cleanup animals that are really good for your system. So they're part of it. They're part of the equation. Yeah.
How do you tell if you're using enough or not enough, or like that's what I can't tell?
Yeah, that's the trickiest part. Yeah. Yep. That's the trickiest part. We recommend 1 teaspoon per 100 gallons, which is a tiny amount, and you can start there and go from there. But it's tough to say. Start off conservatively and increase the dose over time, because it's really hard to give a solid recommendation, because I have no idea how many corals you have in your tank versus somebody else's.
How do you know if it's too much, too little?
So I would say that too much, if you're seeing nutrients coming up, phosphates, nitrates, things like that starting to come up, then maybe you're adding too much. And those are byproducts of animals consuming the phyto and breaking it down and excreting whatever they don't need. And so there's the phytoplankton itself. When you add it to the system, it doesn't start degrading immediately. It's just doesn't work like that. It stays intact for days and days and days. And so something has to eat it, or a filter has to strip it out, basically. So yeah, if you start seeing water quality issues, and that's the only thing that you've changed, then back off on what you're doing. Yeah. Just as long as you're doing one thing at a time. Yeah.
Do you have experience with the sump packs that come with like copepods, with the goal in mind of starting a healthy amount of copepods in your system? Would you recommend? I don't know if you have experience.
Right. Yeah. Those are interesting. Like refugium starter packs and stuff like that. There's people. Yeah, and habitat, like the marine pure blocks and things like that. Yeah. A lot of that stuff you can just DIY. It's nice to have all-in-ones, but you can definitely DIY. The only thing I'd say with those packs is you just gotta make sure you don't clutter your sump with a bunch of stuff. And then you get gunk building up, and maybe you get an anaerobic layer of bacteria, which is bad for a system. It's toxic. They release sulfur and stuff like that. And so it's just refugium. You just got to be careful with a refugium that you don't have too much stuff in it, that it turns into a waste dump. Because they're a little bit harder to siphon. When they're on the ground, it's kind of hard to gravity siphon something that's already on the ground, right? So. Stir them up. I know people use sponge filters. They'll stir up the refugium and have a sponge filter in there, and that'll soak up a lot of the gunk over 24 hours, and then take the sponge filter out. That's a good way to clean up a refugium. But yeah, those kits are great, because what it is basically just what you need is habitat. It's what these animals require. They need habitat to survive and to replicate themselves, and to provide habitat for their babies, so that the adults don't hunt them down and eat them all, kind of thing, because they are cannibalistic. It depends on the circumstance. Opportunistic cannibals, yes. Oh, wow. They will eat their own children. In fact, there's copepods that are used as mosquito control. In Cambodia and Laos, they use mosquitoes in mosquito impoundments. They'll inoculate these bodies of water with copepods, and the copepods eat the mosquito larvae. There's actually pictures of them having captured mosquito larvae and just eating them. Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff.
Smaller scale of a cat getting your mouse.
Exactly. Yes. Well, if nobody else has any questions, I really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much, and yeah, keep supporting your store. Thanks. Cheers.
The TDO packs come bigger?
Yeah, we sell 1 pound bags.
Which store carries those?
Not many.